we will edit. So, a lot of times a church will want an outside consultant to come in and just tell everything they know so that the congregation can sort of improve itself. And then the consultant leaves and there's the congregation left with a lot of knowledge.
And a long list of things to do.
Yeah, which is,
And maybe a little more motivation for doing it. I don't know.
how long
you know,
does that last?
Our research shows. And
I knew
we've
you
had
would
this for
know
over,
the
yeah.
answer to that question.
And we've known this for over 25 years. The congregations learn more from one another than they learn from outside consultants.
Okay, yeah.
And that includes people who come from their mid-governing judicatory, their diocese, their synod, their conference. It's not that that information isn't valuable,
Right.
or that workshops aren't
Right.
valuable. They are. But the point is, they're not nearly as valuable as what congregations can learn from
each
one another.
Okay.
Now, and we want to come back to that theme a bit, because, well, in a way this is kind of simple, but I hate to say it, this sounds a bit cynical, but a lot of lay people assume that outside consultants and clergy are selling something.
Mm-hmm.
With other lay people who do the exact same sorts of things in their congregation as this layperson might be, they feel like, oh, well, if I say this works, I mean, what the only interest they have is
Yeah.
it works.
Yeah.
So let me give some illustrations. We've always had trouble helping congregations learn how to do budgets that are mission focused rather than maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's a fairly abstract idea because it all depends on the particular congregation, right?
And what their mission is.
And what their mission is.
Yeah.
So it's so much easier if you get, people who have to put budgets together
Yeah, yeah.
in 10, 12, even just 2 or 3 congregations, sitting there and saying, okay, we really don't get the money focused in a way that we get the most bang for our buck.
Oh, so you have 3 churches and their finance committee or their treasurers and talking to one another.
Right, and working on this shared, how do we have
Yeah.
money focus on mission
Yeah.
rather than maintenance?
Yeah.
And it never fails. They learn so much more
Yeah.
about the concept. Now,
Yeah.
you can introduce the concept, but you need to have them actually doing real work.
Absolutely.
That actually makes a difference when they go home after that workshop. Another example, we know that there are always persons in most congregations who are really good at noticing the people of peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they know how to do that dwelling in the world
Mm-hmm.
and listening another person into free speech.
Mhm.
Most people don't know how to do that.
No, but there's like 3 guys with radar or something.
there's
this,
just some-
There's this woman who will always notice a visitor or, yeah. Right.
The problem becomes, how do we help those people
Mm-hmm.
teach the people who, are going to decide where the energies,
Yeah.
et cetera, monies,
Yeah.
organization of the congregation is going to go.
Yeah.
The best way to do that is, we find, is pairing congregations, or we call it twinning,
Twinning, yeah.
and having them see how this actually becomes real, or
Yeah.
we call it embodied.
Yeah.
So it goes from an abstract idea
Yeah.
to a real way of living. And it's way easier if they see a congregation and actual human beings describe how that process happens for them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're struggling, it's better than our even telling a story
Well,
about that.
But I mean, this is how CI has always worked. For instance, we do a process where we call it congregational discovery, where members of a church will interview other members, fellow members of the church, and eventually people in the community. And if they're learning that process and then they get to debrief it afterwards with other congregations, they not only teach each other how to listen better when they're doing interviews, they teach us what would be better in the interview protocol and what to put into our training packages after that. We couldn't teach people how to do much of anything if we hadn't learned it first from congregations who are actually
It
living
is.
it.
Even in their mistakes.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Because failure is a key to innovation.
that's right.
I think one of the things I often see happen with people who represent church bodies that go into work with congregations is they kind of flop from one side to the other. That I'm only here to facilitate your learning, or here's something I know how to do, and let's do it. And it's that middle ground and the back and forthness.
Yeah.
That happens when
Yeah.
you put congregations working with one another.
Yes, that's right.
Now, there is a further dilemma, as you know, and you know this is the other shoe dropping. Congregations learn more from one another than they do from outside experts. But
But,
congregations don't want to learn from one another.
oh, no.
That's, I mean, you know, right?
If they
Uh,
did, they would be doing it.
They would be doing it,
That's
and
right.
we would have no work, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But, I mean, and worse than that, I mean, you're the expert in adult education, but most of the way congregations learn from others is going to some conference sponsored by a quote-unquote successful congregation who basically does show and tell. And as you know, show and tell is probably the poorest form of adult education you could offer. Now, that doesn't mean people don't feel inspired and they can try some new ideas out, etc. But you could multiply their capacity
Yeah.
to diffuse an innovation if you were to have them working with one another and learning
Yeah.
with one another over at least a 3-year period of time. So it's not this episodic, occasional show and tell
Which
thing.
generally leads to low self-esteem because in a short amount of time.
We could never do that.
That's
and,
right.
et cetera. And then there's the other painful reality that there are very few organizations that know how to sustain the learning journey. We call it the process of spiritual discernment for a group of congregations to do that, such that they can do this sort of deep change, not just put into place some simple
Yeah.
quick fixes, but to do the deep
Real
change to
action,
become
reflection,
missional.
learning. Yeah.
And that's something we have learned, and seems to work well.